there, welcome back to Jess's Writing Clubhouse, place where you can get writing advice, updates on my series, and all that good stuff. Today is going to be a little bit of catch up, plus a topic that is really close to my heart. It is the topic of why I write LGBTQ plus stories, why I read them, as well as the way media has kind of created a trope in barrier gaze and why that has created a fear of LGBTQ plus movies for me. So just an update on my work. It's been a while since I've actually worked on anything because during the months of November and December, I took a pretty long break from working too often because my mental health kind of took a nosedive. So there's a lot of work that kind of got put on the back burner while I took care of myself. But what I was able to do was I was able to start drafting out The Abandoned One and the Professor, which is book 3 in my Hunter X Slayer series. It features Charlie DeAngelis, who is the brother of Cain DeAngelis from book 2, and Jonathan Valdian, who is Bastion's younger brother from also book 2. And I'm really enjoying what I'm doing with this book so far. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I already feel better about it. And I also feel better about it because I'm trying a new process when it comes to my drafting. I'm trying to draft a lot more fully. Like, this is what maybe the final shape of the story versus what I would do previously, which is I would draft, then I would do my edits, and then I would do a complete page 1 rewrite. I want to cut the rewrite out of my work schedule because that would save me 3 months worth of working time. So I'm hoping to kind of condense things down, and I'm also editing every 2 chapters, I will throw it into Grammarly and edit it. So that way it's as clean as possible, and I don't have to do an entire week of just editing the entire manuscript. So we'll see how that turns out. I'm kind of just going scene by scene. I'm not really worrying too much about how many chapters there's going to be. I'm figuring it might be around 17 if I have, I think, 3 times 17, 41-ish scenes. But obviously, as I start drafting, scenes are going to expand and it's just going to get a little bigger. So I'm shooting for about 40 to 50 scenes in total, so we'll see what happens with that. As far as my other projects going, I have decided that after I finish book 3 in the Hunter X Slayer series, I'm going to take a break from that series and finish up what I have for the series binder so that I can start fresh again with book 4. And then the books I will be working on after that are actually a part of my space opera series. And that one, I don't have a lot right now. I'm still doing a lot of world building because science fiction needs to be really world built. And it was originally very similar to how I did the Hunter X Slayer series, where each one is kind of a self-contained story, but it's part of a bigger world. And I've decided that what I want to do with it is I want to try to branch out, and I'm going to actually make it kind of a soap opera, like what I'm talking about. And I'm still kind of working on how I want to do that, and I don't want it to be super campy like The Young and the Restless and all that, but I still want it to have some kind of narrative. So I'm gonna try to figure out how to do that. I'm still kind of working on that. I've also been thinking a lot on the world building of my heist series, which might end up getting worked on at some point. I don't know. I know that it's the one that's been kind of dominating my brain lately, but we'll see what happens with those two. The other one that I will be working on for sure is my Fae serial, which is going to be going on Kindle Vella. And I'm almost done with the preliminary character building. I do need to do beat sheets for each of the characters and make sure that those are all featured. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not trying to overly plan things out. I'm trying to make it a little bit more loose, because if 2022 taught me anything, is that setting hard deadlines for myself is kind of a detriment to my mental health, because I put so much undue pressure on myself, and I can't do that, especially now that my circumstances have changed. I'm I can't be a full-time writer. I have to switch to more of a part-time writer while being a full-time caregiver to my mother, who is now dealing with some health problems of her own. And she is more important than my writing, so she will be the priority. And if I'm able to get work done, such as these podcasts, then great, awesome, I'm able to get those done. But I'm having to adjust how I do things and the projects that I take on, so we'll have to see how things go from there. So, on to the actual topic for today. I'm going to start off with why I read LGBTQ plus stories, because this has been going on since I was like 12. I've always read and always really wanted stories where the couple wasn't heterosexual or it wasn't a fully straight couple. And I started with fanfiction. I was originally on fanfiction.net. I did move more onto adult fanfiction because I enjoy more adult stories than I do just teen and all that. I never thought that they went deep enough, and I more enjoyed the spicy stories. So that was me. It was probably also a big red flag for me when it came to reading these stories, that it's like, you might not be as straight as you think. So I figured out that my own sexual identity was different than the norm when I realized I was bisexual, and it kind of like gave me an aha moment. So I was like, okay. And then I started kind of figuring out my gender identity, but it wasn't until recently that I've come to terms with the idea that I'm gender fluid, and she, they pronouns really do make me feel good. I will take he if someone does end up using it. It's very rare because unfortunately I am a more buxom person. So it's like, I can't really fault people for not defaulting to he. So they is an appropriate one that I'll use. But I really liked having stories that I could identify with the characters and identify with just seeing someone who was like me on the screen. And I know I got made fun of a lot by some friends because they're like, you like that gay shit? And it made me feel weird that I like these, but now I know it's like, no, you're not weird. You're just expressing yourself in a different way. And you're not weird because of what you read. You're just you. And that led me, because a lot of the movies and TV shows I was watching only had straight couples, I started writing fan fiction and adding in that representation that I wanted to see. And also the psychology of creating characters that, yes, they are gay, they are trans, they are asexual, and just trying to figure out the psychology of living in a world that on one hand wants to support you, but on the other hand has systematically and historically been very against you. And also delving into where that's not an issue. It's more of your own physical psychology. I also like dealing with that because sometimes when you try to do like societal stories, it gets really depressing, at least for me. That's why a lot of my stories, there'll be characters that obviously disagree with how my characters are, but the vast majority of people either don't care or it's a non-issue. And it depends on what I'm trying to portray. Like with The Hunter and the Cultist, obviously Abel lives in a very old school cult where being gay is very much a problem, but the vampire world as a whole, it's like when you live for hundreds of years, it's like there are worse things to worry about at this point. So I prefer stories where sexuality is not an issue, but I will dabble into that in controlled environments. And it just feels good to put out representation for people like me And it's actually why I started publishing in the first place with my Reaper series, because the main character was a lot like I was when I was growing up. It's like I didn't know my sexuality very well. I didn't know my gender identity. And I wanted to create a character that 12 and 13 and 14-year-old me could identify with. Someone who was struggling. Now going ahead and unpublishing that series was a hard decision because I loved what I put out, but it wasn't the right story for me to tell, especially because as a nearly mid-30s person, it's really hard for me to still be in the mindset of that little teenager because I've grown so far from that person and I can't even begin to remember what that was like because it was so long ago. And I've grown so much both mentally and emotionally. So that's why it's like I didn't feel like I was able to portray the character the way I wanted it to. So now I'm more putting it into an area that I think I'd be able to actually tell the story I want to tell while also being authentic about it. Now, that leads into when I was younger, trying to find movies and TV shows with gay characters where they would get their happily ever after. And I found when I was younger, I didn't understand this, but I found that every time there was a gay character or the stories focused around a gay character, one of them would die or be like beaten up or severely impaired, or the couple would be broken up, and it would never end happily. It would always end tragically. And I didn't understand that until someone had mentioned the Hughes rule, which, to paraphrase, basically says that there are certain societal things that need to be shown in a negative light. Like if you show a character who has a drinking problem, they always need to be down on their luck. They need to be just having a destroyed life. They need to basically fix their life by the end, or they need to die because of this thing to show that it is a bad thing. Now, that's questionable in and of itself for alcoholism, but then they also had sections in it about homosexuality. And in it, it was basically saying that if you have a homosexual character, their life cannot be good. They cannot be happy. And I didn't understand why they would want to have this. Now, again, this is my privilege of having grown up in this century, and it's so foreign to me that someone would be so angry and not want to let people who are also human beings just be happy, like be in love, have families, just exist. It doesn't make sense to me. And that's where the trope bury your gays came from. Basically, any movie that has gay characters, they're gonna die, or they're going to be hurt, or they're not gonna get their happily ever after. And it is a way for media to say, hey, this is bad. You're not going to be happy if you are this way. That was how it was created. That's why a lot of Disney villains are portrayed as either effeminate or have very, they're queer coded. They have things that you could automatically say. It's like you are made to represent a stereotype of a queer person. And it's like, well, what happens to the villains in Disney movies? They die. So it's like, but the thing that I always found so insidious about the barrier gaze is that it doesn't even give you like good representation of an LGBT character. It just gives you a stereotype of a character, and then it brutally just destroys them. And it's legitimately just a way for the media and society to say that you're wrong for this life, for this kind of person, this kind of life. And it was just horrible because when I was younger, I would try to find movies for it. And as I said, it's like the characters would always be like not able to be together, or they were killed. And it's like, why? It made me so gun shy about looking up movies that are LGBTQ+. And it's like, I want to watch these movies, but I'm scared of what's going to happen at the end. I'm I'm expecting the other shoe to drop because of how insidious this was in my early viewing. Now, I can only think of a handful of movies that came out in the last 10 years where they still use the bury your gaze, but there are tons of movies coming out that are made by really accomplished directors and actors and actresses, and they don't use the bury your gaze trope. These movies are about actually finding love as an LGBTQ plus person and getting your happily ever after. And a couple of recommendations I can give. There is one called A Christmas Setup. Two of these are Christmas movies. I apologize. And it features Fran Drescher. It's really cute and wholesome. And there's another one, I believe it's called Dashing in December, which I was a little afraid about this one kind of going that direction, but the fact that it was made, I think, by Hallmark. Hallmark doesn't necessarily do the bury your gaze, but they are starting to increase their catalog to include more LGBTQ plus movies. And I know that recently several actors and actresses have decided to leave Hallmark because of their choice of going more inclusive for stories, and they don't want that or they don't believe in that. And I'm not here to pass judgment on them. They can do whatever they want with their careers. I don't care. But it left a kind of a sour taste in my mouth because they tried to have their cake and eat it too with the normal statements that people do when it comes to being called out for possibly being homophobic. And it's very telling. It's very telling. But another one, there's, I think, Fire Island on Hulu and Crush. Fire Island is I think I heard someone say it was like a gay retelling of Pride and Prejudice, I think. And then Crush is a lesbian one. Not necessarily Pride and Prejudice, but it's a lesbian-led film. And I haven't watched them yet because there is still that little bit of fear in the back of my mind. But I do eventually want to watch this. I have watched A Christmas Setup and Dashing in December, which are both really good. And if you want just like feel-good movies, I highly recommend A Christmas Setup. I got it on Amazon Prime. I actually purchased it because I wanted to be able to watch it over and over again. And I also purchased Dashing in December, which I also really love. I'm slowly working through my fear of the bury your gaze trope, and I have a list of LGBT movies that I've been told there is no death and the characters get their happily ever after, but there's still that little part of my brain that is scared, and I don't know if that will ever go away. I hope it will become less of a hindrance, but we'll never know until time comes. So a little bit more of a somber ending. I'm sorry about that, but it's kind of it's a necessary evil to talk about when it comes to LGBT literature and media. So it's kind of like that you have to talk about it, otherwise it doesn't get out there and then you can't deal with it. I apologize for the somberness, but next podcast we should be doing something a little bit more upbeat. I'm kind of workshopping a couple things I want to do with this podcast. I am still working on my audiobook for The Hunter and the Cultist. I'm not sure exactly how I want to publish those, if I want to publish it all at once and just have it come out in subsequent weeks, or if I want to kind of break up the episodes of the podcast with the audiobook chapters. But we'll figure it out going forward. And if you have any comments, you can leave them on the YouTube version of this, because it comes out both as a YouTube video and as a podcast on various different podcasting platforms. And if you want to leave a comment on the YouTube video, that'd be wonderful. You can rate the podcast, and I'd also really enjoy that one as well. So thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. All right? Talk to you later. Bye-bye.